Good morning, everybody. It's Brian with Security Squawk Podcast. I'm here with my co-hosts, Reginald Andre and Randy Bryan. How are you, gentlemen? Welcome to the show. Another show.
Good morning. How you doing, man?
I'm well. So other than we always talk about the weather, so it's 20 degrees here. I don't know what it is where you are, but it's effing cold now. And
yeah, it's the same here. I think it's like 45. We're all dying.
Yeah, it's 20. It's not 40. It's 20 here. 40. I'll take 45. So, all right, guys, welcome to the podcast where we educate you on what the heck is going on there around cybersecurity, break it down to a level I think that everybody understands. I don't think we talk over anybody here. We try not to, at least. Remember, we take comments while we're recording live. Questions, if you have any, drop them in the comments down below on your favorite platform, wherever you're watching us right now. I think we're broadcasting live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and definitely YouTube. I don't know if we're anywhere else. I forget. And today we're going to talk about an interesting FBI warning. Some statistics on a study that was done where it's eye-opening on some of these statistics on how successful hackers are getting in the systems. A Log4J problem that is out there in the wild. That's, I predicted that Log4J was probably going to be equal, if not more, than the Exchange issue that we had back in the spring that is still being exploited today. I think Log4j is going to exceed that in exploitations along the way here, especially in 2022. And then we're still having issues in U.S. schools, guys, with, cyber attacks, even though the government's been dumping millions of dollars in the last couple of years to combat this problem. So we're going to take a look at that. We're going to jump into that. So those are the four topics we're going to jump into today. But remember, before we dive into this stuff, folks, help us grow our show and get the word out. There's value in what we're putting out here. We don't charge for it. So the only fee that we ask is you share the show, share it with your friends, share it with your family, let people know that this is out here. And if they spend, 15, 20, 30, 40 minutes listening to us, they might pick up something and get a little educated, get a little smarter about what to do to protect themselves from these cyber criminals that, as we're going to show you today, are so prolific. So anything you guys want to talk about before we jump into these topics?
Just a lot of good stuff to talk today that's going to, really apply to your average business and your average business owner, for sure.
Or anybody that's, anybody really. I mean, quite frankly, we break some of this stuff down to the personal level, right? We talked about password managers before, and everybody should be using those, whether you are employed, self-employed, or out of work. Everybody should be using a password manager at this stage of the game. So let me pull up our first topic for today, and this is a little bit of a crazy one to me. I guess because I'm so into security and I would never do something like this. But apparently we have to have an FBI warning about hackers mailing malicious USB flash drives to spread ransomware. So screw phishing attempts and screw trying to break in somebody's front door. Let's just mail them a cute little fancy looking device. Maybe you put Google on it. Maybe you put a logo on it that somebody's familiar with. So they think, oh, well, Google would never send me ransomware. I'm going to stick this in my flash drive, in my computer, this flash drive. So let's talk about this article. Andre, what's going on here? What do people need to be worried about? And what are some things, I guess, we'll go over to Randy for some things that we can do to protect ourselves. But what's the issue here?
Yeah, so we have the cyber criminal group. They go by the name of Fin7. And they've essentially been sending malicious packages to various companies. And I would go to the extent where this is like an easy target, because you can find corporations that have like an in-house marketing staff or something like you mentioned that puts Google and like, okay, you need to update your Google My Business page, or you need to update something on your website or whatever. And you put the logo, and then what happens then is you have the employee plug in that USB drive into their computer, And then in the background, without them even knowing, there's some type of malicious activity happening. And then from there, hackers are able to get into the systems and then now put ransomware and other things like that. So essentially, FBI is saying, don't plug in USB drives that are mailed to you into your computers, because there is active things happening regarding that.
Yeah, this is a pretty huge vulnerability, because you can secure your company network, you can secure your users all day long, and then almost everybody I know, I'm sad to say, but would probably, if they got a cool looking USB, would probably put it in their computer to see what's in there, especially if there was a nice little enticing message. This reminds me of one of my favorite series was Mr. Robot. And Mr. Robot basically hacked the whole, well, not the main character basically hacked the whole financial system of the world, if you will. And he did it by making rap CDs. And then he took the rap CDs and just dropped them in front of the financial companies that he was trying to infiltrate. Bottom line, a couple people picked him up. They were like, "Hey, I like rap." Popped it in their computer upstairs inside the building, and that was how he was able to get in. And I know that's fictional, but the reality is it can happen. And this is a big vulnerability. And you asked earlier, like maybe Randy could look at some things. What can you do to stop this? Well, we have software available. Your antivirus software, most likely. There's other softwares out there that can block basically anything on a USB drive, can block all new processes from running. There's a lot of different ways that this can be blocked. So bottom line is it is a big vulnerability, but there are things we can do to stop it.
And these things are like things that people look at and go, oh, I'll never fall victim to that. But like when these things happen, you don't realize that they're happening, right? Those guys who picked up the CDs in the show you described, all they cared about was free rap music, right?
Right.
And that's where your mind's at until, and if, Google says, I could easily send a flash drive to a business and say, here's $500 in free Google advertising. Just plug in this flash drive to see the coupon code, right? And that's how simple it is. And nobody's thinking like, oh, this is a malicious thing, I need to check it, right? So it's reality. It does happen. And I guess the other thing we need to point out is the FBI doesn't just put out, warnings, right? They are at a deep level, let's call it layer 7 level, right? Where they are observing things and observing activity and traffic on the internet. And there's a reason why they're putting this out. It's the same reason why they put out the warning to M&A companies that going under acquisition and M&A, right? That it's because they see activity around this, and it's the same thing here. They're seeing activity around this. They're like companies are getting ransomware, and the FBI is being notified, and the investigators are going in, and they're saying, "How'd you get this?" And they're going back to somebody plugging in a flash drive somewhere, and this is like a new way of being attacked. So, what are some things that people can do? I'll bounce over to you, Andre, and then Randy. What are some things people can do to kind of protect themselves from this kind of attack? I guess besides the obvious of don't plug a USB flash drive in, what things are out there where if, hey, I had a momentary lapse of reason and I plugged the flash drive in. So what are some things that are kind of fail-safe things that come to your mind that people can do to maybe help them not become a victim of something like this, being that maybe they just forget this warning, they don't know, or they accidentally plug it in because they, just a bad day?
The best thing to do is have a policy within your computers that your IT company would have to do, which basically would block USB drives from being plugged into the computer. So even if they can physically plug it in, it's essentially disabled, so that therefore nothing can be written into the computer.
And I would say after the fact, if you don't already have something in place to block processes, and after the fact you already stuck it in, you're probably looking at you need to wipe that computer and start over.
And there's enough software out there that you can program. You can program it to block the use of these devices if you really want to, right? Where if you plug it in, you can have it say like this has been. You can have it just block completely, or you can ask the user if they really want that device to be opened up by the operating system. So, FBI warning: hackers are saying watch your flash drives, especially ones that are mailed to you, right? And these could just remember, guys, that these can come in under a lot of different premises. You know, it could look like, you know, obviously they're going to entice you to plug that thing in, right? It could be to win a free car, or I don't know what they're doing these days. It could be anything. Just think of something that you get in the mail today that might be like free Windows. I don't know. Stuff like that. And then these guys will use those different marketing tactics to try to get you to plug these drives in. So before we move on to our next topic, guys, we have a couple questions I'm going to throw up from the audience. Let me just stop sharing that part of the screen real quick. I think we should reference whatever show we did around this. But the first question I have is from Julie, and she says, what password manager would you recommend? And we did a whole show on password managers, if I'm not mistaken, right? So if you go back into our shows, Julie, and look up the one that's titled password managers, you can either go to securitysquawk.com, Apple iTunes, Google Podcasts, Audible, iHeartRadio, wherever we're at. And you can find that show. It was probably about 3-4 weeks ago. So 3-4 shows ago.
Yeah, 3 weeks ago.
I don't make a particular recommendation. I can just remember from going through that with you guys that there were two that stood out for me. I know, give me it, Randy. Give me the name. Keeper, and then RoboForm was the other one. But we went through, I think, like 5 or 6 on that show. So, and we went through the different variations of, the different features and benefits and whatnot. So you're welcome, Julie. Go check out that show. But Keeper and RoboForm, and I think LastPass was kind of up there as well, if I remember correctly. I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but let's throw it up there. Would it not be a good idea for companies to have an old computer that they have laying around in the office on a completely different network or VLAN to test these things should they want to do any testing for software? Yes. This is basically saying, like, should they have a test environment, right? And in a perfect world where companies have the resources to dedicate and money to set up a test network, you can absolutely do something like this. And it's actually best practices. In my experience, though, the reality of it is this is a rarity where you see test environments set up for companies where they can do this. So he goes on to ask, this can prevent a lot of threats for a company having a so-called sandbox testing machine. Correct. And it's a great point. But the reality of it is, to get something like that in place, we're just trying to get companies to do the basics a lot of the times. And this is kind of way above and beyond. But in a perfect world, this is what every company would be working towards and would have, right? So you guys agree with any of that, or want to add to any of that question from Ruben?
Yeah, like your typical 20, 30 employee office, the test environment is basically live. Like, there's a software that needs to be installed. It's from a reputable vendor. You install it, you let them test it. But, if you're talking hundreds or thousands and those corporations have that budget for it, then absolutely. But smaller companies, that's very rare that you're going to have that type of process.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, something along those lines. And then also, if you were going to have a local machine, not only does it need to be isolated, it would really need to be in some sort of a Faraday cage, which is basically chicken wire or something like that around it, so it can't use Wi-Fi, electromagnetic signals, or what have you. So I think, like you said, this is going to be out of it probably wouldn't be safe for a smaller company to try to do something like this, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it wouldn't. You need to have experts involved, and there's a cost, and it's ultimately a very good security practice, but ultimately most people just don't have the budget or going to see the value in doing something like that unless they're in IT or maybe some software development or something like that. So that's typically where we see it. We don't see it in most businesses. So let's move on. So we have an interesting article here from our friends over at Joe over at MSSP Alert. And this is a little bit of an interesting one. And I'm going to kind of preface the statistics here with the statement that this was absolutely a setup, right? These hackers in this story were hired to do this for these companies. They were given permission to kind of hack in, but they were also, in a sense, a lot of people are going to look at this and say, well, that company let them in, let them kind of get in. Well, and we're going to go through this, but the important thing I want people to remember as we go through this is letting somebody in this manner, in this way, is no different than when your employees let a cyber criminal into your network. You don't think these things will happen, but I'm here to tell you that that's how all these cyber attacks go down. And nobody thinks they're ever going to get hacked. And then you're going to look at this and go, well, I would never do that. I would never click on that. I would never click run. I would know what to do if that showed up on my computer screen. And I would never take that action. And, I'm just here to say that I don't think that that's necessarily the case, because there wouldn't be so many cyber attacks if it were. So hackers penetrate 93% of local company networks. Cyber simulation finds. So I don't know who wants to run point on the details of this article and what it means. So I'll just pass it off to one of you. Just start talking. What's going on here? What is this article about? And what did this company do that was hired, and who did they do it to?
Yeah, so essentially they did 45 attack scenarios, so 45 companies that they use, and then the industries are really interesting, because we're talking financial organizations was 29%, fuel and energy organizations 18%, government 16%, industrial 16%, and IT companies. And I'm sure Randy will talk about the statistics and what they found, but these are sectors that we need to operate as a country. And the fact that, as they're going to be saying, that they were able to penetrate the majority of them is very concerning.
Yeah, I think bottom line here is you're starting off with companies that are wanting to get tested. So they're probably, at least that's my understanding, so they're probably already either in a security mindset or moving towards a security mindset. But bottom line was they were able to get into almost every single network, to a ton of them, 93%. And they were able, within a couple of days, start getting control of things. And I think the gist of this article, or the takeaway, is that we're not as secure as we think we are. And we really need to get serious about being secure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's one of those things where, I just look at this article and I just think people will automatically go, well, we would never let them in like that. And you're kind of letting them in, so you're giving them a leg up. And what I'm trying to say is that the reality of it is this is exactly the environment that most cyber criminals walk into. It's not that difficult for them to get in, or it's not that difficult for them to trick your employees to get their way in. So what interesting, give me one or two guys, interesting stats. There's a bunch of stats peppered in here. What interesting stats came out of this that you saw?
I mean, for me, it's the headline stat that 93% of them were able to be penetrated. That's really rough, man. That's a really high number. It's basically everybody.
Yeah, for me, it's the part where it says roughly 7 in 10 companies, which is 71%, were attacks by poor passwords, including those used for administration. So we always talk about it in our podcast, where a lot of this, majority of this, can be prevented if they just practice common sense things. And we know common sense is not that common anymore, but all they had to do was just have a more secure password, more letters, characters, and not, like we had a client, for example, that used password for their printer and they got hacked. And it's like all of these things that you just have to follow the basics, and your chances of not getting affected go so much higher.
Yep. And really just it became a fishing expedition against these, what they're terming unacceptable events, right? So they identified 6 unacceptable events at each of the clients that they pen tested. And then they went and tried to go after those 6 unacceptable events, right? And they were successful in 93% of them. So basically, to say this another way, basically this is like a hacker looking at your business and saying, I can find all this stuff on the dark web. I can ping servers. I have access to, certain IP addresses that I know this company owns. I've identified certain vulnerabilities that I know exist in this organization. And then you kind of combine those ingredients to, use compromised credentials on the dark web and the access that you might currently have, or, you might take some information on the web, just doing some simple offensive research where you're just using LinkedIn and the website to try to fake fish people. And these are all things that these guys are doing in order to get into the organization. And they're not being specific about what those unacceptable events are. We can sit here and pontificate on what they are. But at the end of the day, it's all the same things that we report on when we report on cyber attacks. Whatever the reason is that a company got cyber attacked is probably exactly what these unacceptable events are. Like, we know that there's dark web passwords that are compromised, and we're really not doing anything about it other than, maybe monitoring, or maybe we don't know at all. Maybe we're just completely have our head in the sand in the fact that we have to monitor the dark web for compromised credentials. You never know, but these are the kind of examples I want to give to people so they understand like what the little details and all these words mean from a practical standpoint. So anything else you guys want to add on this? I think that was good information, good statistics, really paints a interesting picture on the state of cybersecurity in a lot of businesses.
Yeah, it does.
So
one more thing, I was just curious to know. So I did a Google search that says percentage of cars stolen or broken into because of door open, and this article said that police say that 90% of car break-ins are in unlocked vehicles. So again, it's just like that basic thing that you have to do, and your chances of your car being someone entering your car, it just goes down so much.
Yeah, 100%, and it's no different with cybersecurity, right? With a lot of this stuff, it's reducing risk and reducing that percentage, that chance of you getting cyber attacked. So, let's go into the next topic then about reducing your chance of being cyber attacked. And unfortunately, this is an interesting article because it's basically stating and pointing out to people that in some cases with this Log4J vulnerability, it is not possible for this stuff to be patched, or there will never be a patch for it. So, Randy, you were the one who brought this into the green room. And this has to do with federal agencies, this particular article. So what the heck is going on at federal agencies? Why is this a concern? And I guess how widespread is this among the government? Because I know government, I came from there. They love legacy systems, right? Systems that, these are never going to get patched, but we need to run them because they're so important.
Yeah, I can't speak to how many agencies are actually using these devices. But bottom line, it's devices that the manufacturer has determined are end of life. That's what EOL stands for, end of life. So let's say that you have a smart switch, and the manufacturer said the end of life is October 1 of 2021. So we're past that end of life now, which means if they have a vulnerability for Log4J, which is a Java vulnerability, it's in almost everything. If they have a vulnerability for that, the manufacturer's not going to update it. And so now you have a place in your network for hackers to get a foothold. And maybe they're just getting there and they can monitor your traffic. That's not good. And you've got a huge array of devices this can possibly apply to, not just switches, but switches, firewalls. Are they using devices like for Chromecasts? Are they using smart smart sockets, electric sockets? Are they using smart devices to control the AC? I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. So the vulnerability is potentially very, very strong.
Yeah. So my ADD's kicking in. Why is there a picture? What is this? An iguana or a Komodo dragon or something? Like, what is this?
They needed to get it to press, and they just picked a random photo off Deposit Photos and posted it up there.
I feel you.
Or it means
I have no idea.
Iguana protect you or something. I don't know.
I don't know. I have no idea what this animal has.
Maybe it's an old lizard on an old wall.
I don't know, man. Whatever. So one of the things that I found interesting in this article is the government gave federal agencies a December 24th deadline to get this thing patched. And as agencies were working through this and trying to figure out how to make this happen, it was kind of like, we're not going to be able to patch this because the manufacturer doesn't support it anymore, as Randy did a great job of explaining. And the other thing is that some of these vendors that the government identified because of supply chain and pandemic issues, they might not be able to patch these things right away, like the software that the government's using. So it's kind of like a double whammy or double-edged sword with this, but it doesn't seem like our U.S. federal government is going to be able to easily deal with this Log4j problem, and it's going to be a vulnerability for a long time. So Andre, before I go in kind of like the next area of where I want to go with this conversation, do you have anything you want to add to this?
One thing that I found interesting in the article, kind of in the middle, where it says most organizations know they're running the end of life software, and they haven't put the plan due to migration, because funding may have been pulled in 2020 or 2021 for COVID telework requirements. And I'm going to call that out because usually these legacy systems, they're giving warning that this is going to happen. Like you're knowing 2-3 years in advance that there's something, hey, we're going to be upgrading or we're no longer going to support this. And to just blame it on COVID and funding, I mean, it's as equally as important. And usually you plan these things years before. For them to say,
I think the proper way to frame that, and I agree with what you're saying. I think the proper way to frame that is you were asleep at the wheel and now you got to wake up and now you got to, you're going to blame COVID because now you got to spend a bunch of effort, time, and money getting these problems fixed. And you got to do it in the middle of a pandemic, which means you're probably working from home or you're probably shorthanded or people are probably sick right now because of the variant that's going around and things like that. I mean, that's the reality of what we're dealing with today. So let's just talk to kind of like everybody, the business owner and anyone out there that might have a similar situation where Log4j is in their environment. It's not getting fixed because the vendor that they use is no longer supporting the software or what have you. What are some practical things that businesses can do to protect themselves so this vulnerability isn't easy to exploit, easy to get to? Antivirus doesn't pick up this stuff, right? So you got to use kind of special tools to scan for it and find it. And if you know you have it, then what should you do with that system once you know you have it? I mean, what do you guys suggest?
For me, you take it offline.
Yeah, get it as far away from the internet as you can, right?
Right.
There are ways, I guess, business owners and people should understand you could still provide local area network access without internet access on systems. Not a perfect scenario to do that. And then you might even want to think about segregating to the point where maybe just the people who need access to that program can communicate with that system. You know what I mean? And not the whole entire company. So then you're basically reducing your footprint, your threat risk surface area, as I call it, because instead of, a 75-person company with 75 people being able to access that system, maybe you knock it down to like 3 or 4 people. And that reduces the chances of 75 people versus 4 people getting hacked, and then a cyber criminal being on one of those 4 systems and finding this and getting to it and exploiting it. So sounds like a lot, but this is the kind of stuff that happens all the time, right? Hackers are constantly, once they're in a network, are constantly looking for ways to move around and get better access, right? So anything you guys want to add to that?
Yeah. So, I know all 3 of us have the capability, and most of your security people are going to be able to do this, to search your networks for this file. And then I would also suggest, in the meantime, if you find them, a couple of things. You need to look for patches. You need to ring fence, which means like find that process and don't let it do anything. So if it's trying to do something, it can't. And then also reach out to the manufacturers and find out what they're going to do about it. We found this vulnerability in 2 places. Both manufacturers of the software said, "Oh, we don't use Log4J." One even said, "Hey, you can just delete the file. We don't use it." Blah blah blah. So we put like a monitor on those 2 processes, and saw one of them never got used. The other one was still like trying to just phone home back to the corporate, headquarters for that particular software. So we just blocked all that. You can also look for specific IP addresses and or block. That's basically addresses out on the internet. And you can block those from being hit. There's a lot of things that you can do to help mitigate for this.
Yeah, hire a professional like Randy.
Sure.
Don't try to do this on your own. That's you need to hire a professional to do all that blocking and tackling, right, Randy?
Yep.
So, all right, boys. Anything else we want to add to this? We're good. All right. So the next thing we're going to jump into here is, man, our schools have absolutely just been getting hammered, quite frankly, the last 3 years. Ransomware in schools is just ridiculous, in my opinion. It happens all the time. It disrupts remote learning, among other things, and it costs taxpayers a lot of money. So, headline is, despite billions in federal money, American schools remain vulnerable to cyber attacks. So, Andre, what's going on here?
Yeah. I hear you.
Muted up, Rand.
Okay. So essentially, this report is talking about how the federal government has given the American school systems billions of dollars, and they still remain vulnerable. Now, my first thing about this is going back to the second to last article that we talked about. Is, the federal government has they're just throwing money at things, and in this case, just like the article that talked about like 90-something% of tax on these corporations, it's the simple stuff. It's not that the school systems need to change out all of these systems. Now, yes, there could be old firewalls and legacy systems, but do they have the basics? Do they have the password management? Do they have the 2-form factor authentication? And a lot of times, it's not that they need to replace all of this hardware and get the shiniest, new computers. It's just going back to the basics. And I think that's why this article is kind of correlating to say that despite all of this money being spent, you still have all these vulnerabilities because they're not doing the basics.
And that's basically okay. I'm gonna sound cynical right now, but a lot of times that's the government's answer for everything. It's just throw money at it, and throwing more money at something that's broken in the first place is not going to fix it. It's just going to give everybody raises, and yeah, they might go out and buy new equipment with it or this and that, but if they're not doing things right in the first place, billions of dollars aren't going to make a difference. And this is really an opportunity for our industry to help that industry, if you will, that market segment, because they need to get secure and they've got the cash to do it. They just don't know how, apparently.
Yeah, like look at the article. The article said that she advises school districts to use multi-factor authentication, which requires at least 2 access points to log in. Well, that's free. You don't need $1 billion to set up. You may need the manpower, but you don't need billions of dollars to set up 2-form factor.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's tough with the schools. I'm familiar with a lot of the schools. I don't work with them a lot in my company, but I am absolutely in tune to what's going on in terms of like other companies that I'm friends with that I know that work in this space. And, I just see, unfortunately, I see the way school districts structure their IT and how things are done. It's a lot of times run mom and pop-ish, where there's like one IT guy at a school or one IT guy at a district who's running maybe 4, 5, 6, 10, 9, 11 schools. I know here in New Jersey, I know of a guy who is the IT director for a school district. He's responsible for about 11 schools, and he only has one person that helps him. So it's basically a 2-man show. And we're well past the time in technology where you can have one person responsible for everything, right? So if somebody's been responsible for managing your network for the past 20, 15 years, they do a good job of keeping it up and running. It's always available. You have very little problems. And your expectation is that person is going to be able to keep you safe from cyber criminals. I think the 3 of us are here to tell you today that that's not really how it works anymore. You need to have people who have specialized skills in infrastructure and also cybersecurity. It's not the same skill set. And to ask somebody to have skills in both areas and be good at it is, a totally, different ask, right? I can dribble a basketball, but I'm not LeBron James, right? And I'd much rather have LeBron James managing my cybersecurity, than me if if we're talking about basketball skill, right? So what's up? Oh, I heard feedback. I'm sorry. We're good?
Yep.
I don't know mine. I can mute my computer.
No, I'm good. So, I mean, that's the reality. I don't know if you guys agree with my kind of perspective on that, but that's where I'm at with this. It's like the days of like you using the same guy for all these different things are over, right? So schools, if they have somebody who's really good at their infrastructure and keeping things running and they're happy with that, you really need to go outside of the school and outside of the district and probably bring in a third party to do the cybersecurity. And don't assume that the guy who runs your IT, A, has the skills, B, has the time, probably more important than anything, right? If you're 1 or 2 people and you're managing that many schools, do you think you really have the time to be focusing on the things that need to be done from a cybersecurity standpoint? So that's just my experience and what I've seen out there and my input on what's going on in American schools and how things can improve. So what are you guys' thoughts? Agree, disagree? Have any other perspectives there?
Yeah, essentially it's a new position. It's a new body that needs to come in there to be able to manage your other aspect of technology. Let the guys still manage the network and make sure everything stays up, but you need someone dedicated just to the cyber. And it's going to the same thing if you're a small business owner and you have your computer guy or your friend's cousins that's going to school. He cannot, there's no way that he can. Yes, he may be able to add memory and set up your Outlook, but he's not cyber. And I think that's what we have to drill into business owners now.
Yep.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And just goes back to that original point, like, just throwing money at it's not going to fix the problem. Even money and good intentions aren't going to fix the problem. We're going to have to change how we do things.
Yep. And that's it. I mean, that's really the bottom line. We have to change how we do things. We have to understand that the way we've done IT in the past can't be, those ways can't be applied to how we do cybersecurity in the future and things like that. So great show, guys. Thanks for your input. Anything else you guys want to add, for the show? Anything we didn't talk about? Good to go. All right, perfect. So remember, everybody, please share our show. Help us grow the show. Share us out on social media with our live recording that you see here. You can also share our podcast out on your favorite podcast platform. I actually just saw that we're on Stitcher. I was looking at our stats while we were recording, and there's a ton of downloads from Stitcher. I didn't even know what Stitcher was, to be honest with you. I think I've heard of it, but we got some fans on Stitcher, so that's pretty cool. So keep sharing out our show. The show grows every week. And we appreciate you, and we'll keep bringing you this content as long as you keep helping us out by sharing us, watching us, commenting, liking, all that good stuff. So see y'all next week. Have a good one.